Thank you, everybody, for coming. Welcome. Good to see you again, and welcome. Good to have you guys here, and welcome everyone online with our streaming. We're excited to be back in 2026, back with Scott Bradley, going into the Fifth Amendment in our line-by-line presentation of the Constitution. And we hope that these principles that we're presenting, we try to go beyond the basics and really discuss the practical application of constitutional principles. And this is all also part of our overall program that we have, which is to restore the Constitution and train local communities on how to preserve the Republic, on how to nullify at the local level when there's state and federal overreach or county overreach in a city or any overreach anywhere. I had a quick little presentation that just be a few slides before we get to Dr. Bradley. It kind of explains a little bit about what the program of Defending Utah and the American Committees Association is, and which, again, I'm Enoch Moore, and I'm the founder of both of these. So briefly, what we are trying to do is move liberty forward. Okay, under our constitutions, that was the application of natural law under a republic that was a global game changer. John Adams said that he always considered the settlement of America with reverence and wonder as the opening of a grand scene, and design in Providence, meaning in God's plan, for the illumination of the ignorant and the emancipation of the slavish part of mankind all over the earth. So the emancipation of the slavish part of mankind, that's pretty much all of us. And it was meant for the whole world. It was meant for freeing slaves or anyone living under tyranny or oppression anywhere in the world. And right now in our world, slavery is increasing. Debt slavery, like in America, just as the laws, are bound, just like on Gulliver's Island, they slowly tie the giant of the people down so that they can't move. And the need for the emancipation of mankind is increasing as tyranny and the creative ways that they make us slaves is also increasing. The founders understood this problem and the way they solved it, and they knew, though, that more was going to have to come. Okay, so James Madison, echoing John Adams, talked about this belonging to the whole human race. He said, "Happily for America we trust, and for the whole human race, they pursued a new and more noble course. They accomplished a revolution which has no parallel in the annals of human history. They reared the fabrics of governments which have no model on the face of the globe. The republic that we have in the United States was completely unique and does not exist anywhere." It's pretty common nowadays to hear things like, well, there's freedom everywhere. Europe's free and these islands, everywhere is free. And in some ways, because of how bad our freedom is here, it does feel like we're about the same as everybody else, right? And I think because the tyrants don't just come out, World War II style and just shoot people. Yeah, we have an element of where we, kind of feel free, but we've gradually lost this understanding of what freedom is. And so the first thing to understand, the founders who created our system said, nothing is like this. There's nothing else in the world like this. So they formed the design of a great confederacy, which, here's the key part, it's incumbent on their successors to improve and perpetuate. We are the successors of our founders. We have two jobs: improve and perpetuate. We cannot perpetuate and keep what we have if we don't understand what they wrote, why they wrote it, and how it applies to every little decision, every little question about water rights in our local city, every little question about, putting up signs and free speech, these practical applications of governance. We need to understand how the Republic was designed as they gave it to us, and so that we can perpetuate it. Okay, that's step one. Now, what if we mastered what they gave us so that we can perpetuate it? The other task is to improve upon it. Now, that's tricky waters because tyrants would love to say the whole thing's broken, and to improve it, let's just delete it and have a new convention and create something completely different, right? This is not what they mean by improve. Perpetuate first, so master what we have, and then improve, build upon that. And I'm going to briefly explain what I see there. So Thomas Jefferson envisioned exactly what future generations must do. Now, as he envisioned what it is that he saw America's posterity hopefully someday figuring out. And then this comes from how much study he gave to setting up what we have. So this is from the book, The Majesty of God's Law. Thomas Jefferson spent nearly 16 days making certain that the ancient principles of Anglo-Saxon law were stipulated or implied in the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. They studied this history and they knew what they were perpetuating. Okay, and so just briefly in 2 slides, you may have seen this diagram, the Republic of Moses, where Moses was like, how do I govern millions and millions of people in the desert? And this revelation that was given to him on these principles of local government, local self-government. Let the people govern themselves. But you have to create this structure. And so it broke down these tens of tens, which is very famous, 1,000 families, 100 families, you know, and how low can you take those families? So this structure was something the founders loved, especially Thomas Jefferson. He thought that was absolutely amazing. He recognized it as part of natural law. He even saw that the Anglo-Saxons imitated the Israelites in this structure. So it has nothing to do with religion, although truth was revealed to Moses in Mount Sinai on how to govern people properly under natural law. The Anglo-Saxons copied him, and many people copied him throughout history. So Thomas Jefferson implemented this structure, trying to break it down smaller and smaller and smaller, where he created these wards, which is something that is smaller than towns, counties, towns, and wards. This exists today on the East Coast. There is historical memory of this in these early New England areas. So with those key ideas, consider this. This was a gem that I found, a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in February of 1816. So writing to this gentleman, I don't know who Joseph Cabell is. You may know? You don't even know that? Yeah, okay. But this is in the historical record, and he says, "No, my friend, the way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one." Okay, not centralized, but to divide it among the many, distributing to everyone exactly the functions he is competent to. So let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation, its foreign and federal relations, limited enumerated powers, the state governments with the civil rights laws and police and administration of what concerns the state generally, the counties with the local concerns of the counties, and each ward with direct the interests within itself. So this principle is getting smaller and smaller and smaller according to the interests. The beautiful gem that I found in this letter that I think might become the whole message of what I've been saying for years. This is a great way, I thought, to summarize it. It is by dividing and subdividing these republics from the great national one down through all its subordinations until it ends in the administration of every man's farm and affairs by himself. Each individual is part of the republic. That's part of the ladder of republics. By placing under every one what his own eye may superintend, that all will be done for the best. Okay, so here's a little picture I created of Jefferson's ladder of republics. Federal, state, county, city, but ward is another republic. And how do you keep subdividing? Neighborhood republic to the individual. So in this little chart here, this is the way to have good and safe government. Subdivide it. Okay, when the founders say we need to understand what they have to perpetuate it and then improve, Jefferson's vision was keep subdividing, keep on breaking that down, because there will always be, people far away from you, but that it's getting harder and harder to trust people, even in the county and, city. A good group of people can make a difference in their city nowadays. I've seen it, especially in, smaller areas. Salt Lake City is a lot harder, a big city like that, right? But the principle here is, getting smaller and smaller. And this is interesting because, so a few years ago, as I was trying to solve this issue of how do we enforce the Constitution, and I kind of discussed, without understanding Jefferson's vision here of the ladder of republics at the time, I thought through this and I thought, we have all these levels. The green is our properly assigned government, but we have these regional governments and these political parties, all these interests that are blurring the boundaries and destroy these green layers, which is where nullification is supposed to happen, which is how you enforce the Constitution. And so I thought, it kind of makes sense, we have to build more local. So this is from a few years ago when I put that together, and hearing Jefferson, I realized that was what Jefferson was envisioning also. Keep subdividing down until every farmer is in charge of the republic of his ranch. And so that essentially is what I try to help people see nowadays in communities. I'm always looking for leaders who can understand this. And I have this book over here. I could show anyone on how we build what we call committees. Committees is just the idea of organizing kind of a provisional association of individuals in your neighborhood that could be a precursor to a neighborhood republic or something along those lines, and also influence the city in actually sanctioning the subdividing into wards and so forth. And so this is something I've been speaking about wherever I go the last couple of years, and kind of fine-tuning and hitting the nail on the head a little bit stronger each time, I think, as I learn. So anyway, that's about it. I'll turn the time over to you, Scott. And we're going to deep dive into Fifth Amendment today.
All right, thank you. I feel like I got a little caterpillar on my chin here or something. I don't know. We talk about taking the fifth. It's not a fifth of a gallon. There's a process and principle behind it. And we'll talk about that a little bit, hopefully this evening. As is always the case whenever we have a precursor discussion, there's a lot of things I want to talk about. But no, it's not up there anymore. This ladder thing, what is it, the 28th chapter of Genesis, where Jacob gets to look at this ladder to heaven, back and forth, the angels ascending and descending, and you get this concept of, there's a communication link and everything. And I think God does have an awful lot to do with our existence, in spite of the fact we are loath to recognize his hand oftentimes, sadly. But just so much. I mean, we got to do the Fifth Amendment. I know. And when do we got to end? I don't want. I'm going to try and go fast and fly low here, but the Zoomies are coming in with the delivering the load. But just one thing that I think goes very closely with what Enoch was talking about. Senate Bill 54. Oh yeah, everybody remembers that one, don't they? That was the one that destroyed the most organic level of republics in our state, the state of Utah. This nation was founded as a republic in every single step of the way. And there's a presentation I give that's extended and long, as you might well imagine, from any of you that have listened to me before, wherein we talk about that everything was a republic from the beginning. There is no democracy in the United States other than the way we elect our representatives to the United States House. Even the way we get our senators, or at least used to get our senators, was absolutely a Republican form of government, because Republican forms of government are based upon representatives selected by the people to operate within the limits and bounds established constitutionally. Okay, so the most organic, well, if family, you could obviously talk about that, but in terms of political process, the caucus system was an organic understanding of how republics were supposed to be handled. You meet with your neighbors, your friends, your associates, in your most close neighborhood relationships, little caucus meetings, and you choose representatives. Those representatives are tasked with the responsibility of examining the potential candidates. They vet the candidates. And if they're doing their job right, they should go back and report to their constituents in their caucus and say, look, this is what I found out about this bozo, and here's one that looks like it has some promise, or whatever. I don't know how the conversation will go, but it'll probably be in stronger words than that. But the fact of the matter is, they were to vet them at the county level and then vet them at the state level, and they were to select representatives, selecting representatives that would then perform labors within the limits and bounds constitutionally established. So what Senate Bill 54 did was it completely leaped over that and found a way for the rich and famous to come in with name recognition and a lot of advertising money and all those kinds of things, was able to come in and say, no, we have a better idea. We've got monarchs or elites or whatever you want to call them, Mitt Romneys of the world, if you will, the Orrin Hatches of the world, if you will, the Spencer Coxes of the world, if you will. Those of you that are from Utah have known these names. And basically what they did is they buy their office based upon the billboards they put up on the freeways, the advertisements they run in the big media, television and radio and everything like that, the big mailers that go out and all that. They buy attention. And because people don't understand the limits and bounds and how we had a Republican approach to government, representatives choosing representatives that are then given a responsibility to act within certain limits and bounds, and consequently we're well on our way to completely losing our republic. And again, every step of the way, and we could talk about every aspect of what happened to bring us to the point that we had that constitutional form of government was a Republican form of government, nothing to do with a party. And I might just parenthetically, because things pop in my mind and I have to say them. I don't know what it is about this, but I do. There were no Democratic Republicans. There were none. Zero. Nada. That didn't exist in the days of Madison and Jefferson and all of those folks. They were Republicans, or they were Federalists. Okay, now we could talk about the differentiation and why sometimes Federalists were really good and sometimes the Republicans were better. But the fact of the matter is, the Democrat-Republican denomination is a historical revisionist approach to things. There was a guy named Edmond Genet that came to the United States, an ambassador from France. He was a revolutionary kind of guy, and they sent him over here to be our ambassador. And he wanted to get some help in the war, the latest war. So he came down deep south, and he started, there was a tender spot in the heart of Americans to review and assist France, because France had been a big help. I mean, Yorktown would not have turned out the way it did had the French not been involved. Lafayette came, under his own nickel, and he, outfitted, and it was an incredible, incredible asset in gaining liberty. So the Americans had this soft spot in their heart for French. And obviously we've been at war with the English not that long before. So obviously it was kind of an easy sell. They started outfitting ships to go to sea and go fight, as privateers against the English and all that kind of stuff. And Genet meandered his way up to see Washington, George Washington, not Washington, D.C., Jefferson and Washington in particular. Jefferson was Secretary of State. Washington was the president. And all the way along, he started these Democratic Republican societies. When Jefferson and Washington heard about it, they were livid. They responded very vigorously. And privately, probably Washington let loose with some blue streaks because he knew how to dress down concepts that were wrong. So, and they published it. They let it be known. This is not a democracy, it's a republic. The Democratic Republican stuff was a French transplant to the United States. And these societies just withered and died, okay? And by that time, and just as a little happy side note, Washington demanded that the French recall Jeannette. Well, by the time floating back and forth across the big pond, and there had been some major changes in the French Revolution, and Jeannette had fallen out of favor and was going to lose his head if he went home. So Washington gave him asylum, if you will, and says, why don't you live in New York the rest of your life? Which he did. But the fact of the matter is that the Democratic Republican societies were not a creation of the American Founding Fathers. It was an absolute antithesis of what had been created. Read Federalist Paper 10, for example. I don't know, there's a whole bunch of them. It's seeded in there like the good leaven in the bread and everything throughout all of the Federalist Papers. 85 essays. It's not in all 85, but it's in a gob of them. It's a republic. And they were very adamant. In fact, if you read Hamilton, now unfortunately Hamilton wrote most of the Federalist Papers, but he wrote some good things too. But the beginning portion of the Federalist and the ending portion of the Federalist, he said absolutely, if we have not proved to you this is a republic, in the sale that they were doing for the Constitution, you got to reject it. I'm going to recommend you reject it because it is a republic, unequivocally. Republics were well understood or well defined. The founders wrote it, they meant it, all that kind of stuff. So, this republic thing, this idea that was on the screen moments ago, that talks about this ladder, if you will. You can make these analogies between what Jacob saw in the 28th chapter of Genesis, and you can talk about what the founders saw. We can unequivocally, using their own words, prove that the finger, the hand of providence, if you will, was upon those that put this national government together. And this collective genius, if you will, that God bestowed upon these people, and I'm firmly convinced he did, and the founders were convinced he did too, came out with the best thing that we could find. Now, if we get far enough along tonight, and if I finish, you for sure will see it, in the concerns that they had of these people reworking this stuff. And the reason I put it in here is, yes, it applies to what we're talking about, but also it applies because at the time we're filming this, and there may be 55 years from now, somebody will get this video out and they'll go, oh, they talked about republics, and then, oh, they were talking about the CONCON thing. Oh, what was it? Where? Huh? What time? Here it is. It's the beginning of a new year. Legislatures all across the nation are meeting, and they have a huge push right now to set our existing Constitution aside and write another one. Some people you may respect, some people you have great, maybe even endearment in your hearts to, are trying to replace our Constitution. And so I have I sometimes get asked, Utah doesn't seem to care, but some other states sometimes have me come and talk to their legislatures when these things happen. The last couple I've talked to have been in Idaho and in Montana. Now, they've got CONCON, Constitution Convention resolutions in front of them right now. But the last time I spoke to them, they also had that, and I tried to present the reasons why they ought not do it. And then the big advocates of this, they brought in their big gun, Ron DeSantis, to Idaho and into Montana to try and unseat what this imbecilic guy was presenting against it. And amazingly, not amazingly, I think the people had enough wisdom to reject what Ron DeSantis was saying. Here's a guy that's being promoted as the next president of the United States. Maybe, we don't know yet. But these people that want these things, they want to change the fundamental principles that are operating in this nation. We're going to talk a little bit about that definition here shortly, if I'll shut up and do it, okay? But with what Enoch was saying, this Republican form of government goes from the lowest rungs to the highest initially. And now we've abandoned that largely because of the way we allow the federal government, if you will. It's not the federal government. It's not the national government. I call it the general government. I'll use that term every chance I get. but because people don't understand where it all fits, if you read the 39th Federalist paper, you'll find that James Madison said, it's not a federal government. Oh, but it's not a national government. It's a blend. There are some things that are national, going to war. That's not something Georgia can do because Citizen Jeanette came and says, hey, we got to go to war against England. Okay, fine, let's get a ship and go. No, there's a lot of good reasons for the stuff that is wholly and solely in the hands of the national government. But it's not a federal government either. But it is, because there's some things that collaborate between this confederation we've got, and it all works out together where this shared power is out there. But there's limits and bounds to everybody. And so not a national government, it's not a federal government, it's a general government. That's how I call it. Even though the founders sometimes call it the national government, sometimes they call it a federal government. But Madison, with his brilliant, sparkling analysis, was able to say, yeah, no. And it's interesting to see how this is happening today, where the national government is getting humongous and the federal government, the way people understand it, they're granting power to it also. But there is a difference. There are limits and bounds that the delegation of authority comes to. And we're going to talk about this in a moment, again, I promise. If you read the Declaration of Independence, watch for this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created or equal. Created? Oh, that means God. They are endowed by their Creator. Oh, there's another reference to God. There's 4 in the Declaration. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. It mentions a few, and then it says it's the purpose of government to secure those rights. Didn't say it's the purpose of the general government or the federal government or the national government or the state government or the municipal government or the county government. It said it's the purpose of government to secure those rights. Every piece of government should be holding out these protections of your God-given individual liberties. And sadly, our legislature in the state right now is meeting. You know, it's the time that all individuals' life, liberty, and property are at stake because they are meeting. That's a famous quote from a judge back in the 1860s, but we don't need to get off on a tangent like that. But most legislatures consider we the people to be a revenue source. It's not fully tapped, so we've got to look for another way to get in their pocket to be able to fund some of our favorite projects. But the true purpose of government is to secure God-given rights. It says it right in the Declaration of Independence, applies at all levels of government. So these kinds of things, and I've not completely diverged from what I want to talk about this evening, but we may have to split this into 2 parts if I continue to be so verbose. And by the way, I'll just tell you a little. I was on the radio today, and somebody asked me a question, and I was struck by the fact that I talk too much, okay? And maybe you're supposed to if you're making a presentation, but I got thinking about that. And I well, maybe I talk too much and I got to listen to my wife more. Right, Tamara? Uh-huh. Maybe my kids and maybe my grandkids. And maybe, just maybe, I ought to listen to God more. And so it's, you know, as this started to build on my mind, I started thinking, you know, I sit down, I stand, kneel down, lay down, whatever, however you pray, and you talk to God, it's kind of gimme. Oh, by the way, while you're at it, and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to be so mercenary or crass about this whole thing. But lately I've been trying to listen more. And that, I mean, when you're in this approaching God kind of thing, it struck me that so often, a great many of us know a lot about God. Oh, I can quote the scriptures front, back, and upside down and backwards and oh, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but do you know God? And unless and until we come to that point, I think we're still remiss. And so I would say as we contemplate these things, in approaching God, we'd give some time to hear his answers. And I think it'll settle upon us. Still small voice, sometimes strokes of brilliance or whatever, but collectively the American founding fathers, when they were in their most difficult times in the Convention of 1787, it looked like it was going to fail. I mean, we can't get past this point. There's too many bumps in the road. And Ben Franklin, the deist, really? In fact, I wished I could review with you what he told Thomas Paine about his godlessness. He said, "Put it away. No, it's not gonna age well." You know, I mean, and Thomas Paine, I mean, he said some really good things, but he was an idiot in many cases, and Jefferson had to bail him out of the French noose. Well, it wasn't a noose, it would have. But at any rate, so you can't quote Thomas Paine and be sure you're always on track. But he did say a lot of things, but keep that in mind when you're looking at him. But anyway, so Franklin got up in the convention and he says, you know, painters have often, well, no, that's at the very end. What he did say was that unless the Lord have a hand in the building of the building, it's going to amount to nothing. And so he said, I therefore beg leave that we have prayer be offered in this room every day before we start. Now, in those days, a lot of, you know, religious leaders, they made their living by, you know, being paid, and they didn't have a budget to pay anybody, so that the founding fathers, in their own right of being religious men, did supplicate God. And the results, I think, came out in the product that they produced. But it was still kind of imperfect, according to some concerns. I'm glad these concerns were voiced, and we ended up getting the Bill of Rights. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. So anyway, we're going to talk about the Fifth Amendment, which basically is ancient Israel's law of self-incrimination. That goes back thousands of years. Okay, the grand jury protection, the idea of double jeopardy, due process, sacred nature of private property. What the heck does private property have to do with freedom? We're going to find that it really is about everything. And we'll see what the founders said. We'll see some other really brilliant philosophers said, some of the mentors of the American founding fathers said, and what the other side says. You know, the Karl Marxes of the world. And we're going to find that private property is essential. And honestly, my former senator in my community, he's not there in the state legislature anymore, thankfully, he said, what's this about private property? There's no constitutional preservation of that. It was like, read Article 1, Section 1 of the Utah Constitution. You might see it there. But the founding fathers had this definite protective view about private property. The Fifth Amendment helps preserve that. But this double jeopardy stuff, due process, sacred nature, private property, all that's being lost right now. So there's been some perversions of the amendment that have come out in recent, shall we say, 10 decades, because it has been a long time. It's been more than that, actually. And so we'll talk about how maybe some of these things started really getting violated back in the 1890s by Supreme Court decisions even. Okay, so we talked about the Declaration of Independence, about the origin of rights, the purpose of government, the consent of the government is required. We're going to read that in a minute. Right of the people have to alter or abolish any government which becomes destructive of these things, and the right of the people to institute new government. These things did not and do not and have not and will not go away. It is our right as a people to be self-governed, but that consent of the governed is required. And how do we give that? It doesn't completely happen every election. What happens is we choose trusted representatives that then take an oath, raise their arm to the square before God and say, I wish there was time to give the presentation on oaths that I love to give, and about how we've strayed so far from that. Oaths of office are sacred. And you imprecate, that means you involve the vengeance of God if you don't keep your oath. It's a sacred act before God himself. And so, what's an oath? I mean, who cares anymore? We're told we're a truce-breaking people. In the scriptures, if you go read the New Testament, we are. We break almost every promise we make. Oftentimes beginning with our marital vows. I mean, there's so many things that we don't take sacred anymore. But they're taken before God and they are sacred, and we must hold them sacred. And so all of these things play into this, and the Bill of Rights is one of those things. We'll get to that in a second. Here, the Declaration of Independence begins with something that helps us understand the American founding fathers were not wild-eyed radicals bent on burning the country down and then going home and watching on CNN. They had skin in the game. And I wish there were time to explain to you what it cost so many of those men and their families. But they came together and they used a legal basis for what they were going to do. And it comes down to they were depending upon the Westphalian Treaty of 1648. It was a treaty that had happened clear back in 1648. We're talking decades before these guys met together. And what had happened is that the powers of the world had agreed about sovereignty, about nations. If you ever want to read it, if you can stay awake the whole time, I mean, because they call each other the most sovereign and frightful leaders of all the world. And I mean, I hate it when these guys get such big heads. It's kind of like go read the introduction to the King James Version of the Bible. Horrifically bad. King James was an absolute tyrant. And many of the things that he insisted be in there and that the people put in there was to keep his favor, to curry his favor. Nevertheless, all these sovereigns think they're pretty hot stuff. But in the 1648 Westphalian Treaty, they said, nations are sovereign. No supranational organization can impinge upon the sovereignty of those nations. Within their nations, their sovereignty. There's no second-class nations. We're not the first-class nation, meaning the United States. Neither was England at the time, or France, or the Pope at the time was the one that was the instigator of most of these problems, and his alignments with different governments, because the supranational organization of the church was impinging upon the sovereignty of the nations that were there. And they had these, 30 years war, 80 years war. I mean, it was going on and on and on and on forever, kind of like what we do with our wars today. But it's kind of the basis of it is what we're doing with our wars today too. Because supranational organizations, whether it's the United Nations or NATO, or you look at, most people don't even remember SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. That's what we fought in Southeast Asia. That was our justification for being there. These are supranational organizations that are enforcing their will upon individual nations that are within their grasp. Okay, so 1648, they said, no, it's not good. You can't interfere with the internal affairs of a nation. And nobody else has any right to tell anybody what to do. Like, well, what's happening in Iran? Oh, I've heard about that. Or Venezuela. We can kidnap and pillage and plunder. We can do piracy on the high seas. We can do, all sorts of things. By damn, we're going to come in and bomb your country again if you don't, capitulate to us. They're saying a lot stronger than that, because what they do will kill people, and that's wrong. And it violates the 1648 Westphalian Treaty. But the United States, it wasn't the United States at the time, I admit, 1776. These guys were not only historians, they were intelligent men. They had studied these things clear back into ancient Rome and Greece and all of the history of the world. And they had a framework to do this. Our framework in America is horrid today. But what we see is they're establishing a legal basis for what they're going to do under the Declaration. And these opening comments and the closing comments, we'll talk in a minute about the 27 offenses of the king in the middle. They're kind of the, oh, by the way, here's what that turkey the king's doing to us and why we think he's a tyrant. But the opening paragraphs and the closing paragraphs talk about what sovereign nations are all about. So here's what begins with. The course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station with which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. Okay. They're going to say, here's why we're doing what we're doing. We're going to shed blood over this. This is not a lightly taken thing. So, that's the beginning of this. And then it says, created equal, creator, inalienable rights, secure the rights, governments instituted, consent of the governed, all these things we talked about, the right of the people to alter, abolish, and institute new government. That still exists. all of this stuff that we're talking about that was foundational to America coming about, America was saying, look, based on international protocols, we know if we can declare our independence and become a nation among nations, you guys will honor that. And we have forgotten that. All of the United Nations, the League of Nations, all of the treaties we've got, everything that impose our will upon someone else violates the very premise under which the United States was established. So it's a big deal. And when Trump says we're going to go bomb Iran or Somalia, or we're going to send weapons to Israel to turn Gaza into a Stone Age area, whatever, all of that stuff is a violation of the international protocols that this nation was established on and upon which we rest today. But here's the thing. It's good for the goose and good for the gander? I don't know. One of the reasons Trump wants to go bomb Iran is because they're not treating their protesters right. Are we ours? The question might be. And is it okay to go kidnap Maduro? What happens if somebody came here and kidnapped somebody and took them out? Are these acts of war? Absolutely they are. And, well, yeah, but Maduro was not elected as he should have been. Really? Well, there's been a few questions about the effectiveness of our elections. And this goes way back. And Lyndon Baines Johnson actually got his Senate seat by election fraud. I mean, he became a senator, then he became a vice president, then he became a president, and it's happily ever after, right? So, I mean, these kind of things happen, and they've been happening for years. And you talk about what happened at the beginning of this century and a couple of elections since then. There's people that are going, wait a minute, there was fraud. Maduro did fraud, and he used the same machines that we use in Utah to get the election. Anyway, so is everybody ruling to be taken out and kidnapped and taken incarcerated? Well, there's an indictment against him. Well, Bibi Netanyahu, has international indictments against him. Well, it's just the International Criminal Court. I know, but there's an indictment out there. So what happens if he got kidnapped? They dropped in some, Delta Force guys on his patio in Tel Aviv, and they whisked him out of there. We're talking war. We're talking war, kids. And how about piracy on the high seas? That's what started the War of 1812. The Brits were stopping our ships and boarding our ships and doing what the heck they ever wanted to do with them. Well, we were kind of doing that too. Yeah, but now the Iranians have started in the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, that's a very big choke point. I mean, they just in the last couple of days have seized a couple of oil ships. Well, yeah, I know, but they were ships that shouldn't have been hauling oil. That's what we said too. But do we have the right to do that? Anyway, there's a lot of things that are going on right now that are in absolute violation of the baseline that we established this nation under. So all of these things apply, and you're going to see how in a few minutes, maybe, hopefully, you'll see how these apply in us getting the Fifth Amendment, okay? So they get past these first few paragraphs, and they say there's a long train of abuses and usurpations, that the king has exhibited this tendency to have absolute despotism. We have a right, we have an authority to throw off that kind of government and to put new guards up to secure our liberty in the future. So let's say we're going to submit these to the candid world. So you guys can look at the reasons we're going to war and we're declaring our independence from this country we've hitherto been loyal to. We've been loyal subjects of the king, but by golly, they stepped over the line. I like to read the Declaration of Independence as today's news today, and you would be shocked, perhaps, if you were to look and see, if you read them in today's world context, holy cow, this is being foisted on us again. Okay, we could talk about why I think it's salvageable, but it's getting less so. But at any rate, so then they go into 27 offenses that the king has done. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them that kind of play over into the Fifth Amendment, okay? And eighth one, he obstructed the administration of justice. Our justice system is really, really whacked. And let's talk for a minute about, let's talk about warrants. Let's talk about, search warrants and arrest warrants. Historically, they've been done in the judicial branch, okay? And what that says is it's going to be looked at in the judicial branch shouldn't be working for the executive. They're an independent body that has its own problems right now too. But what they're doing now with many of the things they're doing administrative warrants, which is some dude or dudette, I don't know how you'd say that, some guy or gal, that they've given this title of administrative judge to, and they write these things out. And it's just like it's not the judicial branch. And they're arresting people and they're breaking down doors based upon these things. And it's like, okay, I'm now designating you as an administrative judge and you can write whatever you dang well please. We can probably trust you, but maybe not all of them, okay? So that's the problem. And they do this stuff with traffic tickets. I mean, this stuff isn't real judicial kinds of stuff. You pay your ticket and you go on your way, and whew, I got off of that one with a $150 fine. Boy, I was lucky for that. Whatever. But we are losing track of what real justice is. And when you say that the American founding fathers wanted to have this idea of the general welfare has nothing whatsoever to do with redistribution. There's no redistribution of wealth allowed. You could read the Constitution from now until the cows come home, or maybe tomorrow morning or something, whatever, and you'll never find an authority to take from one and give to another. I don't care who it is. You can't take it and give it to a foreign power, to a corporation, to a state, to a county, to a municipality, to an individual. You cannot do that based upon constitutional authority. It's done constantly. And then we don't even need to get off on the Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 stuff in the Constitution where the heck did Trump get the authority to spend money that was never legally authorized? I mean, and we could talk about that the rest of the evening. So all of these kind of things are being done by usurpation and ignorance or unwillingness to abide by their oath of office. So one of the things that the founding fathers had against the king was he's been obstructing justice. Okay, he's deprived us of the benefits of trial by jury. We could talk about all sorts of things that are happening nowadays. You try and get a jury if you've got a speeding ticket. It's going to be a really interesting case. Okay, so anyway, that's the main reason that people resisted having the Constitution as written in 1787 was that there was no Bill of Rights, but primarily the jury was not well protected. Yes, Enoch?
I did try to demand a jury for a speeding ticket one time.
Tell me how it went.
I think essentially the response the judge said was like a long time.
Oh, it was a long time. I remember your interaction.
He gave me a large essay on the authority to enforce petty crimes.
Yeah.
So by calling it a petty crime or an infraction, then none of the rights matter.
Yeah, infraction, but it costs you just like you could have gone to jail over it, couldn't you?
Right.
Yeah, I remember this. This was several years ago, probably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely the case. And I could tell you story after story. I've had a lot of interactions with police officers on the highway. My sparkling personality probably adds to that. But when I was 16 and traveling the country on my motorcycle, I must have got picked up 3 or 4 times a week. They always figured this kid riding this motorcycle probably was there for no good purposes, and so I got picked up 2 or 3 times a week. But anyway, it's happened a lot more recently too. But anyway, we won't get into all of that. But the benefits of trial by jury, you've tried it. It didn't happen. You weren't going to get it. You paid your fine and you left, didn't you? I have seen so many people, good friends of mine, people I love, they get picked up for a cracked taillight. They spend 2 weeks in jail figuring they're going to beat the system. Most people can't be off the job 2 weeks unless they want to take a long vacation, sitting it in behind bars. I mean, it just doesn't turn out happy. I've never, ever, not once, not ever in my entire experience of decades of this, seen one of those things turn out happily. I've never seen it. So anyway, I'm getting far afield. In fact, I started 45 minutes ago being far afield. Okay, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. We send places to people to dark locations that we deny, and we beat the snot out of them until they They agreed that they were guilty. And by the way, who started the waterboarding scenario? Not you. It was us. The U.S.? Absolutely. I know. I'm just teasing you. I know he wasn't there in the Philippine insurrection. The United States implemented the waterboarding process during the Philippine insurrection, they called it, 125 years ago. We waterboarded over 5,000 tribal chiefs, killed over 3,000 of them with their waterboarding. And then when the Japanese did it to American troops in World War II, it was war crimes, but the United States started it. So anyway, we've got a whole bunch of blood on our hands for that. Altering fundamentally the forms of our government. Virtually everything that's done today has fundamentally altered the constitutional form of government that we have been granted at such great cost by our American founders. And I wish there were time to go into all of this. You know, if I get talking on the side, it's going to go on forever. Okay, so then they go on to say, a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So that's why they took the action they did to become a nation among nations, sovereign nation, independently operating. Nobody can dink around with their internal affairs. And they hoped that if they could make it stick by force of arms, that they would be that. Okay, that's what the whole Declaration's about. Okay, so let's talk about Constitution for a minute. This guy, Noah Webster, we like him a lot. And it's very wonderful. If you took, in fact, here's what I did. I hate to tell you this. In my book, To Preserve the Nation, I've got a section in there about the farewell address by George Washington. I went through and I identified, I haven't counted them exactly, but probably 600 words that were used in that farewell address that are commonly misapplied in today's world. And I defined them out of Noah Webster's dictionary, and I used them in 2 sentences showing how they were applied under the proper definition in Noah Webster's dictionary. When I teach young people the farewell address, it's 6 lectures. 6 lectures. I mean, talk about a Grinch. Can ruin their whole day. And at the end of every lecture, I assign them a paper to be written in the tradition of the Founding Fathers, using the original works of the American Founding Fathers to develop the theme that I assign them out of that. Then they've got to take these 600 words, or however many there are. They've got to learn them. They've got to learn how to spell them. They've got to be able to define them and properly use them in a sentence. And then when they're done with all of that, there's 6 essays, there's 6 lectures, and their big review of this vocabulary. If they do okay on that, they pass the 6 lectures, okay? So I'm a terrible, I don't know, a tyrant, I guess I might say, when it comes to that. But Noah Webster was the guy. He was a founding father. He was very much involved. He was in Philadelphia during 1787 summer, but he wasn't at the convention. But he had the founding fathers over for dinner sometimes. And anyway, a great Christian fellow. And he put a dictionary together that tells us the words that were used in the founding era and what they meant during that era. And here's what he said about a constitution. We'll just go with the bold because I'm way behind time. In free states, the Constitution is paramount, we'll come back to that definition momentarily, to the statutes or laws enacted by the legislature, limiting and controlling its power. And the legislature in the United States gets its power under the authority of the Constitution. Okay, so let's talk about paramount. Superior to all others, eminent, highest order, the chief, the highest of rank and order. So, the Constitution is paramount. Any act of the legislature which contradicts the Constitution, or any effort by any department or branch to exercise a power not granted within the Constitution, is unconstitutional, legally illegal, null and void. Do we have any of these things? Absolutely we do. In fact, almost every act that every government performs nowadays is, you'll take umbrage in the Constitution. And by the way, at the end of this presentation, I take all through this, we talk about the constitutional authority to do this and that and the other. And then because we're in Utah, I talk about Utah and what Utah's Constitution says. And surprise, surprise, it's an almost exact replication of what the United States Constitution says. And so when our Utah government, like that senator I was telling you about, it doesn't talk about private property. Yeah, it really does. You know, Article 1 really does talk about a lot of these things. And so, but they don't even read it. They go up there and, hey, we got some untapped revenue out there, and those people out there, we're going to have to figure out a way to get it out of their pocket, and let's just expand government to take that. We're a mother may I government and people nowadays. So here's what St. George Tucker said, and many of you have been around with me a lot, and he was probably the preeminent constitutional scholar of the founding era. And this is what he said about the Constitution. It is a written contract. Government was reduced to its elements, its object was defined, its principles ascertained, its powers limited and fixed. Now, I don't know how he can hog tie stuff any better than that, but he says, you know what, if it don't say it, you ain't got it. Okay, in terms of how a government may act. And we're going to find, just because I'm having probably, since it's been a while since we've been together, to remind you why we got a Bill of Rights. And we'll talk about the Anti-Federalist Papers in a minute. So let's look at the origin of it and why it's important today. There's a few things we need to understand about the Bill of Rights. 3 of the guys that sat through the entire Constitution Convention, the summer of 1787, refused to sign the proposed Constitution. What? Are you kidding me? George Washington said, kind of in his own diplomatic and statesmanlike way. They didn't sign it. These 3 guys sat there through the entire thing. And some of the most eloquent, powerful, and important components in the Constitution were suggested and supported by these 3 guys. Okay? Not just those 3. There was lots of others that contributed much too. But those guys wouldn't sign it. And Washington was sorely dismayed. Like, why didn't you guys say something before now when everybody's going to get up and sign it? It was like, it doesn't have a Bill of Rights. Okay? So, after they got done with their convention, see, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson had spoken often, written great correspondence back and forth before the convention got together. And Jefferson had forwarded many documents, many volumes of information to Madison to use as reference material for this. So Jefferson had a hand in it, even though he was the ambassador to France at the time for the United States. And so he and James Madison were very heavily invested in this thing. So James Madison, excitedly, when it's all done and they've signed the Constitution on September 17th, he got a copy of it and he sent it off to Jefferson. Obviously, it didn't go by email. It had to go across the big pond, okay? So Thomas Jefferson got it, read it, and then he responded. He said, here's what I like about this new Constitution. And then I have some concerns about this. The biggest, baddest concern of all, there's no Bill of Rights. And he was very concerned that trial by jury was not protected like it should be. Well, Article 3 mentions trial by jury and is very specific, and I'll tell you why it says what it says if you want to discuss that. But Jefferson was concerned that there was not enough emphasis because a jury is absolutely essential to maintain your freedom. And nowadays, by the way, since the Sparks case back in the 1890s, they've been trying to take away the jury's right and power to judge both the law and the facts. Were there time, I would review what, we might do it at a future presentation, what Jefferson and others said about this jury nullification stuff. It's nullification, people. The people can nullify in a lot of different ways. One of them is through a jury. But now if you propose that, they're going to arrest you for being an insurgent or something. I don't know what it is. They'll check and see if you've got a 155 millimeter artillery round in your back pocket or something. I don't know, but they just really and truly, most people probably don't know what 155 millimeter round of artillery is, but it's a big bullet, okay? They send them across long distances against the enemy, and they do some horrific damage, high explosives. Enough said. Anyway, so these were his concerns that Jefferson mentioned back to James Madison. And little did James Madison realize at the time that this was going to become a critical criticism. In fact, we probably weren't going to end up with a Constitution if guys like Thomas Jefferson had anything to say about it. It was held that strongly. So here's what Jefferson wrote to Madison. I will now tell you what I do not like. First, the omission of a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth, general or particular, and what no just government should refuse or rest on inference. Now, what's this inference thing? Well, James Madison's position was, look, we didn't give, and this is what the general people that were in the convention said, was that we didn't give enough power to this general government to violate any of our rights. We gave them these powers and that's it. How is that going to impinge upon your rights? Yeah, they can take the nation to war, but they sure as heck can't tell you what color shoelaces to wear or whatever. Pick a stupid subject. But that's the thing, and Madison saying, yeah, it's inferred, it's not in there. You don't have that specific delegation of authority to violate rights, so why is it a worry? And Madison got kind of poured back in his bottle by Jefferson. When Jefferson said, you can't just rest on inference. You can't, no, there's got to be a Bill of Rights. And that was kind of the way Jefferson wrote. So there was others that had that position also. The Constitution needed a Bill of Rights. And these were not your run-of-the-mill, raggedy edge kind of patriots that are conspiracy theorists, as they'd say today, right? No, they weren't those kind of guys. They were very eloquent, well-spoken, well-thought, and actually well-reasoned individuals. They had a footprint in the nation. Unlike today, can you name 5 statesmen? Well, we don't need you to try and come up with some right now. You'll be too distracted. You can maybe do 2, maybe. And oftentimes where did that come from? But at any rate, the fact of the matter is that these people were well known by the American colonists that had sought to become a nation. So there was a real sticking point, and these authors, these other well-spoken people, and you'll see some of their pictures here in a minute, wrote about it. You've heard of the Federalist Papers, 85 essays? I recommend you read them and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Because if you don't, you're missing a big portion of the whole debate that happened back in their day. They demanded a Bill of Rights, so they called it the Anti-Federalist Papers, and everybody in those days used a fake name, and so you wouldn't say, that's Madison. Madison has this feeling about it. Well, just discount everything Madison said. Most people wouldn't be stupid enough to say that, but they didn't use their real names, so they were isolating themselves from personality, and they were talking more about principles, okay? So these guys wrote under different names, just like the guys in the Federalist Papers did. Here's some guys. Oh, there's a gal in there. Can you imagine? This woman, Mercy Owen Warren, she deserves a statue or two and a book or two and a few, shall we say, streets named after her. I don't know what you can say. I don't know how you can honor this woman. Her eloquence and her involvement in the fight for liberty is just monumental. You say, I've heard of her husband. Yeah, he's a bright guy too. Yeah, but he's not as bright as her. I mean, it's not for me to judge people's brightness or not. But you look at Abigail Adams, for example. These good men that were the founding fathers were wholeheartedly well yoked to good women. And so this is anti-Federalist paper stuff. So their eloquence and their power and the writing, see, their stuff got published every bit as widely as the Federalist Papers did, okay? And so it became apparent that their movement had grown legs and was very well supported. Now, I got to admit, when I read the Anti-Federalist Papers, I'm saying, why? 2 Federalist Papers ago, Madison addressed this issue. Why didn't you read that before you wrote yours? And maybe they did, and maybe they didn't, and it may have been that they were kind of contemporaneously being exchanged, and there wasn't a complete reading of everything. But sometimes I've found myself reading the Anti-Federalist Papers that I get really kind of frustrated. Well, that was just addressed a week ago maybe they all didn't get before you a week ago, So it's understandable. This was not an immediate exchange kind of thing in the technology of the day. But it became apparent they weren't going to get a constitution. It's not going to be ratified if they don't have a Bill of Rights. It was basically their central theme. No Bill of Rights, no Constitution. You ain't going to get it, okay? So there was a movement that was started to have another convention. And it was growing legs. And some of the largest states in the nation were thinking this might not be such a bad idea. I'm going to read you in a moment a letter that was written during that period of time back to one of the instigators out of New York. And James Madison penned the letter. And when we read it, I hope you'll think about, and this is one of the reasons I put it in here, that these individuals, and Utah has a big hand in this. Utah has 2 calls for a convention that are currently on the books. Shows you how stupidly we've been led in this state. And again, it shouldn't be a surprise to you. I mean, kind of goes from the top to the bottom. There's maybe occasionally, I can't think of any right now, but there's occasionally an eloquent, powerful, principled individual there, but they're very rare, very rare. So anyway, there was a movement. See, they had this 9 states, ratify the Constitution thing, and then it becomes our Constitution. Well, in the middle of the summer in 1788, they had reached that threshold, but they still wanted some of the big guys to get in, like Virginia and New York. Because if Virginia and New York weren't in, they were big population bases. They were very kind of centers of wisdom and all that kind of stuff. Virginia particularly in terms of its statesman-like stuff. But Virginia and New York were holding off. But by the middle of the summer in 1788, they had their threshold. And so this letter came out and was responded to by Madison in November of 1788. So technically you could say, well, it's been ratified, so jump back, Jack, pour you back in the bottle. We don't care what you think. But Madison took the time to respond to him because they were trying to call another convention, even though, and he was out of New York, the guy was, even though there had been technically a ratification, a few months before. So those that had attended the convention during that long, hot summer of 1787 were deeply concerned. If we get another convention, this ain't going to go right. Now, I would ask you as I read what James Madison wrote back, think about how that applies in 2025, 2026, 2030, whatever. I would submit that each one of these words could be given an order of magnitude more emphasis because it's a bigger problem today than it ever would have been then. Everybody at the time this letter was written that attended the original convention of 1787, they could have been at the new convention. They could have been. And their wisdom of that long summer could have been, laid on the table, and they could have said, okay, yeah, we talked about this, but here's why we don't have recall of senators. Here's why we don't have term limits. Here's why we don't have writs, or that's what they called paper money issuance. They could have gone through all of these discussions. Here's why we have a bicameral Congress. Here's why we didn't eliminate slavery at this very moment. Go read the Federalist 42 if you're interested in that. But there was a big movement. Let's have another convention. Because now that we know what's at stake, we're going to do it right. Okay? Thankfully, didn't happen. So here's what Madison wrote back. November of 1788. He wrote, if a general convention, remember, general government, federal government, national government, a general convention is a convention for the entire nation, okay? A general convention would take place for the avowed and sole purpose of revising the Constitution. It would naturally consider itself as having a greater latitude than the Congress appointed to administer and support as well as to amend the system. It would consequently give greater agitation to the public mind. Now that everybody's in there, we all want to be in the meeting. Come out and tell us what you talked about today. They didn't do any of that in 1787. Give greater agitation to the public mind. An election to it would be courted by the most violent partisans. So we got people that are passionate. Do we have any people today that are passionate on both sides? Yes, we do. They're going to be at each other's throat. No, there's only a few on the one side, right? Anyway, the toads that are in favor. Well, wait a minute. There's toads on both sides. Anyway, election to it would be courted by the most violent partisans on both sides and would probably consist of the most heterogeneous characters. What the heck is that? It's a mixed bag is what it boils down to. We're going to get a mixed bag of characters in this next one. Now remember, there's a call for a convention going out right now. In fact, Idaho's going to vote Monday, I think, on this. So they just keep throwing the mud against the wall. And we can take every single one of their delusions and we can point out why it's a problem. And I wish there were time to do that, but that'd take an hour and a half just in itself. Someday, if you're interested, we'll maybe do that. I limited it to 10 delusions. But the fact of the matter is that there's a whole mixed bag of characters that try and get into this thing, okay? Most of whom are the ones that are initiating this. Would be the very focus of that flame, which is already too much heated men of all parties, would no doubt contain individuals of insidious views. Let me just give you an insidious view. California's call for a convention to rewrite the Constitution specifically targets the Second Amendment and eviscerating that completely. Everything you've heard that the most left of all leftists in this country want to include in the new Constitution against the Second Amendment would be included in this new one. Now you need to understand, and we could talk about, well, let me talk about it for a minute. I've been talking for an hour and I'm only 37 slides in. Oh yeah. What have I got here? Did you put something nice in it? No. Camera, why would you do such a thing? Oh yeah, some of these murder mystery shows that are out there, the Brits keep putting them out. How can we trust the Brits? Anyway, okay. So, right now, today, before most of the legislatures in the nation they're trying to foster this idea of a new convention, it's a sales pitch. And what they're trying to do, there's a number of specific issues they're trying to do, and all of which are addressed by our current Constitution, but which they don't care. But one of the things they're saying is we will have one vote, one state. So Utah will get a vote in the convention, Wyoming will get a vote in the convention, California will get a vote in the convention, Idaho will, New York will, et cetera, et cetera. That will never, ever, not in the slightest dream by anybody, it's a major delusion, that will never, ever happen if we get a convention together. Why? Well, California has about 39 million people. Okay, Wyoming has under 600,000. So if you do the math, if Wyoming got one vote at the convention and California got one vote, they're like 63 or 64 times more powerful than the average Californian voter because they have a smaller population, but they get as many votes as California does. What's the governor going to say? What's all the congressmen? What's all the senators going to say? And that more than likely, and the Congressional Research Service has written about this, the most equitable thing that they say could happen would be to pattern it after the Electoral College. So we get Utah because we got 4 Congress critters and 2 senators, we'd get 6 votes. I think Idaho gets 8 or something like that. Wyoming, on the other hand, gets 3. They got 1 congressman, because that's the minimum they can have, and they got 2 senators. California has 54 votes. Now, if we pattern this after an electoral college pattern, there's 535 electors in the electoral college. We could explain why that went that wacky way. That there's 3 more in there. Washington, D.C. gets 3 votes, and why that happened. But, so there's 535 electors. California has 54. That's 10%. They got 10% of the vote off of the, and their latest call for a convention says we're going to gut that turkey of a Second Amendment. And it passed overwhelmingly in the California legislature. Okay, so right now we're way behind the curve when we're going to lose the Second Amendment. What about this thing about a balanced budget amendment? Okay, virtually every state is verging on 50% of their entire revenue source is the federal government. Okay, now, Connecticut is the least federal government tied. That's oddly, to me, I don't know how that happened, but it did. They're like just over 31%. Most of them are 50 or over. And because I spoke a while back at the Idaho legislature, they're 41%, I think. Okay, now how in tarnation are they going to say, let's get a balanced budget amendment? Oh, we'll give up all of our federal funding. It ain't going to happen. You talk about holding back one drib or drab of the federal legislative revenue stream. Sign me out of that one. Okay, so it's not going to happen. All of these things are they're just illusions. But, so this under the mask of seeking alteration is popular in some parts, but inadmissible in other parts of the Union. California wants the Second Amendment eviscerated. I presume that most of the people in Utah, well, okay, let's take the thing here. We got probably, I'm a concealed carry instructor, and I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but I'll bet you we have over 700,000 concealed carry people in the state of Utah. Yeah. In fact, many of the people that you probably know are carrying when you meet them at Walmart, okay? And so that's a pretty big number in the state of Utah. You know, what do we have, 3.3 million people or something like that? Do the math. About 22% of the concealed carry people, at least, are women. And boy, I wished I could play you a 911 call about a woman that wasn't carrying. It's absolutely chilling, but that's not the purpose of this thing. So there's some people who are going to get elected to the convention. They're going to have absolutely a dedicated thing. Hawaii, by the way, under a convention, has the same Second Amendment bent that California has. So there's two states, for crying out loud. Okay, and there's others, New York and Illinois and some of these others from the large population areas, that might have a dangerous opportunity of sapping the very foundations of the fabric. Going on with Madison's warning, under all these circumstances, it seems scarcely to be presumable in the deliberations of the body could be conducted in harmony. They can't even meet on the street and be friends. Somebody's got a baseball bat nowadays. Okay, or terminating the general good, having witnessed the difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, which assembled under every propitious circumstance. So they've got all of these. This might really work, hopes. And he said, that's how the first convention was. It ain't going to be this way. I should tremble for the result of a second meeting in the present temper of America. What about 2026? Yeah. And under all the disadvantages I have mentioned. So that letter was dated November 2nd, 1788, to this George Thurberville guy out of New York. I think all of those apply orders of magnitude more and greater warning than today. And they're delusional to think that they're going to get anything that's even nearly as tame and collected and cool and calm and deliberative as what they were facing in 1788 when that came before James Madison. He was the father of the Constitution, remember? So they didn't want to go to another convention. And so the founders said, look, ratify it as written, and our first order of business when we get together in Congress would be to prepare and propose a Bill of Rights to the states for ratification. Okay, so September 25th, 1789, remember they got elected, they started the Congress, they had the Electoral College vote, I mean, all that kind of stuff. George Washington was voted on April 6th, 1789. 100% of the Electoral College voted him to be president, and he was inaugurated April 30th, okay? So they started when the president was in place and the Congress was in place, looking at this Bill of Rights, okay? And it took them clear until September to get the basis of a Bill of Rights. There were 12 amendments that were put forward, 2/3 of both houses, and 10 of them got ratified at that point. One of them got ratified 200 years later, because there was no expiration date, one of those 12. So now 11 of those have been ratified. There's one more out there, and it could still get ratified. If it did, it would be a very large Congress. A lot of people have said, oh, that wouldn't work for this reason. Other reasons are saying this. And some of us are saying, well, it might work good if we add that and so on. And we don't want to debate that right now. But there's one of those 12 left that could be still ratified. So that's from the original Bill of Rights. But here's what the preamble said. Just like, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, remember the preamble to the Constitution? There was a preamble to the Bill of Rights that was sent out to the uh, the states for ratification, saying, okay, here's why we're doing this. And basically just look at the underlined portion. In order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, meaning the general government's powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. So these things were further constraints on the general government and protecting individual God-given rights more definitely because of stuff like, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson and, these other people say that we had. So here's the Bill of Rights, the Amendment 5. Now that we've come down to, we're an hour and a half into this, an hour and 10 minutes into this. So this is what the Fifth Amendment, it actually was the Seventh Amendment of the 12 that they put out. So the First Amendment was the Third Amendment in their original 12. And the Second Amendment was the Fourth Amendment and so on. Okay, this was the Seventh Amendment on those that were proposed. But of the 10 that were ratified on December of 1791, this was the fifth one. The two were left out. One came in 200 years later. One's still out there floating around. Okay, now that you're thoroughly confused, let's look at what the Fifth Amendment currently says. And we'll read the whole thing momentarily, but these are key issues that I think we ought to consider. A requirement for indictment by the grand jury before a person may be tried for serious crime. We're going to talk about a grand jury and why they did a grand jury and where this fits. And it was a further protection of juries that Jefferson was interested in. There's no double jeopardy for the same offense, having once gone through a trial process. We don't follow that anymore. If you get let off in a state of a murder charge, there's going to be a federal charge brought against you for violation of civil rights. Same crime, same incident, same everything. There's going to be a federal crime against someone's civil rights if the state, running the system doesn't work. So there's double jeopardy all the time now. The accused is not required to witness against themselves, self-incrimination. So you hear people saying, I take the fifth. That doesn't mean they're going to go out and drink a fifth of whatever. It means that they're taking the Fifth Amendment to not incriminate themselves, okay? And you'll see that this is thousands of years old. This is a process for free governments and ostensibly based on the God's law. And, you talk about this, the slides that were up initially about this ancient Israeli way of, I'm not talking about the modern state of Israel doing anything. That's a completely different animal. It's not biblical. And we can dissect that any way to Sunday you want to, but the modern state of Israel is not the ancient state that Moses brought out of Egypt and then were led into the promised land. But that's another discussion for another time. So, due process is required to take a person's life, liberty, or property, and there must be fair price paid for private property taken for public use. Basically, everything that's in here now is we used to do it that way, but not so much now. It's a sad thing. So here's the amendment in its entirety, and we'll read that, and you'll see some of these things jump off the page to you. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. We'll get to that shortly. Except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in the time of war or public danger. What the heck is that about? We'll come back to that in a minute. That goes back to Article 1, Section 8. See, these guys, even though they didn't have computers to do word searches and go back and forth among everything, they remembered what they had written in Article 1, Section 8 about, Congress having power to set the rules of engagement for the military. Okay. So anyway, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in a criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor to be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So, you might notice that in these Bill of Rights things, they cram some very basic God-given rights. You look at the First Amendment. Well, there's 5 things in there. That's not just one thing they're addressing. The Second Amendment's pretty explicit. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This idea of quartering troops and so on. But the Fifth Amendment covers a lot of things that has to do with an accused that's got protections. And we're going to look. Sixth and Seventh Amendments do that too when we get to them, if you guys don't throw me out and say, no, we've heard enough. Okay, but at any rate, and probably when we do the Sixth and Seventh Amendments, I'll try and put them together. So we're probably going to have to do the Fifth Amendment in two settings, but the Sixth and Seventh we'll try to combine into one, so we'll save you some time. You're going to be able to skip ahead in your reading. Okay, so let's go through this a little bit at a time. No person shall be held to answer for a capital, so that's or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So this is a serious crime. You know, normally if you got a traffic ticket, this would not qualify, okay? So there is a difference between some of these more and less serious ones. But if you're going to be accused and go to trial, there's got to be a filtering process. And we're going to talk about this over a slide or two. But basically, the grand jury has to examine the evidence. And you know, if you got announced in the newspapers that you'd been arrested for jaywalking, still, that's your name, you know, and here you are, this crappy criminal walking across the street the wrong way. I mean, everybody gets, oh man, I heard about this guy, yeah. Anyway, but on these infamous crimes, you know, if it's murder, it's theft, it's, you know, some kind of embezzlement, it's a property scandal or whatever, they want to make sure that they've got their ducks in a row, that they really have a case. So there's got to be a grand jury, and this is done in private. The grand jury is sitting. The prosecutor brings in the evidence that they have. They might even bring some people in to testify. But you as an individual, if you're going to be accused of this, do not have representation there. And in a way, it's an ex parte kind of, you know, a one-sided presentation. And that's what happens, by the way, in red flag laws, for example. You don't even know that your neighbor says, I think this guy is depressed. Yes?
I actually have a question on that. I was thinking about it. Maybe you can repeat it. But this sounds like even something like the FBI, you can't just arrest someone, file some paperwork, and charge them with, you know, murder or something.
Yeah.
Unless they first get it to a grand jury. So it's like a pre-jury before the jury later, even.
It is, and that's the whole idea, because if you were going to be accused of something by the FBI, and honestly, I kind of hate to admit this, but it's a fact. I've been interviewed quite a number of times by the FBI for different reasons and causes and things like that. Nobody was saying I did anything wrong, by the way, because it wasn't a grand jury that was to be brought to bring an accusation against me. It was for them to build their case to bring to a grand jury, okay? And so we've had the FBI come by and check bets with me on a few things. But that's the whole idea. If you're going to be accused of some, as it says, otherwise infamous crime, that's a pretty serious thing. You will probably be arrested. You'll be put in jail. You won't be able to participate, maybe, unless you get a bail, in the preparation of defense. Your name's going to be in the paper. Oh yeah, Enoch got arrested for blah, blah, blah. Oh, I knew there was always something a little off base with that guy, you know. I've been thinking this for years. I'm joking, of course, but that's the fact. As it gets presented in the newspaper, your name is going to be slandered. And you know what? Some people will never be able to forget that. I'll give you an example. One time it was an employment example. But there was a woman that was a manager in this company that I was involved in, and she had because of a role play that was happening in a hiring process, she was an incompetent buffoon in the role play. And you know what? When I knew her more in the future, I could never shake that. It's like, oh yeah, that's. Do I have to sit in the same room as her? You know, I mean, it was like, but she actually was a very capable manager, leader, and probably a genuinely, and as far as I knew, a good person. I never worked for her directly, but I had seen her in this role play with a situation for an employment situation. And honestly, I never, in all my contact with her in the years afterwards, could shake that incompetent buffoon mentality I had. But if you get that arrest and it's in the local newspaper, oh yeah, I kind of always thought that about this guy. So anyway, this is a pre-review, okay, that has to happen on these serious crimes because there's too much at stake. You could lose your business, your reputation, you could lose, your family, all sorts of things could happen. You could lose your friends. Now, most of that's already happened to me, except for the family thing. But the fact of the matter is, all of these things can be dragged through the mud. So they wanted this to prevent, okay, I'll make another statement here, and I think I can usually document it pretty well. I'm personally of the opinion the American founding fathers had a bias in regards to their justice system. And the bias was in favor of the accused. And they went to extreme efforts to make certain that a guilty party did not, an innocent party did not get convicted and found guilty. Excuse me, I need another sip of this. I'll just tell you why I do this. When I was 4 years old, my grandma made cough syrup. She was Danish in her origins. She had a lot of the old world stuff in her, and she made a lot of home remedies. And she had this cough syrup methodology that really worked. It was lemon, honey, butter, and whiskey. And it was all warmed together, and it was smooth to go down and everything. I don't know what they call them, a hot toddy when they got butter and stuff like that. Okay, never had a hot toddy. Oh, yeah, I guess I have for Grandma. Grandma would warm it, and she'd give you a tablespoon of it. And by golly, my cough is gone. And so when it wore off, I'd go back to her. I'd say, Grandma, I need another some of that cough syrup. And she'd give me some more. And the third time I'd go back, she says, you can't have any more. I say, well, why not? She says, well, it's got whiskey in it. And so I was, as a 4-year-old, appalled that my grandma would feed me whiskey. And I says, who can you trust if you can't trust your grandma? But you know what? It worked. And so I always keep thinking I'm going to get something that works for a cough, but that never happens. Who could you trust if you can't trust your wife, right? That's the thing is if a wife can't trust their husband, how can I trust him? So that's just food for thought. So anyway, that's a side trip. We have to break the monotony occasionally, as if there's ever any. So before a person can be charged with a serious crime, the grand jury has to examine the evidence, okay? And the prosecutor that's got it in his hand will come in and tell the grand jury about it and said, based on these things, we think this person should be arrested and charged, okay? So the prosecuting attorney gives the evidence to the grand jury. It's done in secret. There's no newspaper people in there or anything like that. And then the grand jury has to deliberate and decide. Most of the time, now I haven't known a lot of people that at the time that I knew them, they were on the grand jury. I've known one that really, really, really had a courageous act against the federal government. Twice he indicted the Federal Reserve for fraud. And it got tossed in the can. His life was turned upside down and backwards. His business was destroyed. The federal government really responded. They did not like somebody telling them that this Federal Reserve thing was really fraudulent and a bad thing. We can talk about that someday, maybe. So what's happened nowadays is they usually try and get grand juries out from underneath rocks that they find in various portions around the world. These people have not been exposed, and they're basically, they become rubber stamps. This one other individual I'm thinking of, he used to tell me, he says, why would the prosecutor ever ask for anything that was questionable? I mean, if it's unwarranted, no, I fully, yeah, they must know, so I'm going to vote for an indictment. And it's been said that in New York, you could indict a ham sandwich. And I'm pretty much convinced of that, because if the prosecutor says, we think they're guilty, yes, sir, 3 bags full. And but that's not the case. Okay, this was there to protect the individual that was accused. And if there wasn't adequate information, the grand jury would say, heck no, stronger than that even. Don't bug us with this thing. And that's what I say, the bias all the way through, and it's on every aspect of everything that happens in the Bill of Rights, was there to protect the accused. There was never a railroad, ramrod kind of element of this that says, we're going to hang these guys or hang them high, judge kind of thing. And so the idea was it was there to protect the accused. They did not want an innocent person being tossed in the can. Okay? So the arrest and trial are extremely embarrassing. It's a dramatic effect on the life who faces these kinds of things. Okay? So it was put in place to prevent a burden on the charged person if the charges were unsubstantiated or flimsy. Sadly today, most of the people, well, I'll just give you an example. I was not called to be a juror in a grand jury. I was called to be a juror in a criminal case that was before our local court system. They didn't tell me what it was about, and so, they were asking questions, and they said, of all the people that in history, who would you most like to meet? And I'm thinking, well, George Washington, James Madison. I mean, what about some of these, really brilliant tacticians? And oh man, why not this guy? And the more I thought about it, I thought, well, really, the one person in all of history would be Jesus Christ. I would rather meet that person than anybody else. And that got me disqualified. Oh, we can't have that guy. Oh, he's a religious zealot. Well, no, think about it. Would you like to meet the Savior? Oh, I mean, some of us would, some of us wouldn't. I mean, he might cast me out. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, he's a pretty cool guy. So anyway, what I said was, I'd most like to meet the Savior. Well, what I found out later was this was a trial on a child pornography case. And they obviously didn't want some religious zealot judging that case. And so anyway, I don't know what all went through their mind, but they got reasons for getting rid of me. But the fact of the matter is, those are the kind of things that they eliminate nowadays. If they think that you haven't been living under a rock for so many years, they must automatically select you. I mean, or deselect or whatever, based upon what they think, how you're going to spin this case. So that's what the grand jury's about, is to prevent charges being brought that could be devastating to the individual, their family, their business, and reputation, and all that kind of stuff. That's a filtering process to protect that. It's a jury that most people, number one, don't get to sit on, and number two, that really hears things in private. And it's a protection, is what that is. Okay, so let's go on to the Fifth Amendment. No person, well, we already did that, grand jury. Now the black, bold, underlined. Except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Okay, so they eliminated the grand jury thing for military type situations. Why? Well, let's look in the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 14 and 15 to see, because they'd already addressed that. Okay, so here's what it says. Congress shall, remember Article 1, Section 8 starts every clause with Congress shall have power to, ... Okay, make rules for the government and regulation of land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Now, for those of you that may be, no, I'm not going to suggest anybody here would be inclined to this, but I have talked to many people that are just chomping at the bit to get the United States to operate under military commissions. And it's like, huh? I mean, I'm going to write an audio book someday, because you can't just write, huh? It's, huh? I mean, what the heck are you thinking? That's what the whole deconstruction of the South happened. When they ran the South as a conquered nation, and there were military tribunals that were doing it. Those guys ran under this clause where those guys were judged, jury, and hangman. If you had a set of officers in front of them, they could just as soon take you out as not. Okay, so that's how things were run in the post-Civil War era. And we could talk about how that came away, the posse comitatus thing, and I'd like to talk maybe sometime to you why we shouldn't get too complacent with the fact that we have the posse comitatus laws. Yes, sir.
So we have a number of items being referred to the DOJ from other individuals who have done some investigative work, right, and then referred to the DOJ for them to make a decision whether to bring charges against the individuals, right?
Yes.
And they seem to be incapable of doing that. Is it that the grand jury process is holding all that up?
Okay, the question is, with all the stuff that's supposedly going before for review by the DOJ, Department of Justice, why we can't ever get an indictment. And I think that the problem that you bring up is probably the reason it's not happening. I mean, no, is not the reason it's not happening. Okay, I think that there's a lot of reasons why they're not bringing charges. One of which is they're protecting people. The Jeffrey Epstein thing has got to be a principal thing to consider. They're protecting their cronies and buddies, you know. Hey, wait a minute, I know Joe, what a party he had. Well, let's not talk about that because, you know, Joe, we need Joe to be on our side when we, you know, bring this bill up. I think there's a lot of that that's happening because of cronyism. It's protecting, it's deflecting, and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of other reasons that it could be a problem. One of which is, let's just say, the DOJ would like to, Department of Justice, would like to bring about let's go kick the door in kind of thing, and they're getting it off of an administrative judge. But that's not the judicial review that the founders envisioned. And another thing, they might not just have a solid case. And so there's a whole bunch of things, and they can make a whole brouhaha of this thing, and Pam Bondi too, but what's her name? Carolyn Levitt could get up and talk about the incredible things that this individual's guilty of, and then nothing comes of it, does it? Nothing ever does. Well, it may be that the spin that they're putting on these things, so it may be totally lacking in justification for what they want to have done. So there's a whole bunch of reasons for that to happen. If there's a justifiable reason, let's have the grand jury, let's have due process, let's arrest them, and let's go to trial, let's do the due process, and come what may, let's see what happens. Now, back in the days of the founding fathers, let's just take a guy by the name of Aaron Burr. Okay, Jefferson hated Aaron Burr. He hated his guts. And Aaron Burr was accused of a lot of things. You know, Aaron Burr shot Hamilton. You guys might remember that. And Hamilton was a scurrilous man that cheated on his wife and did all sorts of egregious things. And he screwed up our economy and the first bank of the nation and all that kind of stuff we can lay at his feet. But he ended up being killed in a duel with Hamilton. Hamilton and Burr. Burr, by the way, was the vice president to Jefferson at the time. He didn't pick him as his running mate, by the way. This was an electoral college pick. But at any rate, Jefferson just wanted to hang him out to dry because he thought he was trying to build an empire. He was trying to break off from the United States and take the federal lands, and he was going to set himself up as a king. I'm abbreviating a lot of things. But he was indicted. He was charged. He was arrested, and they did have a trial. And they couldn't convict him. They had numerous opportunities to hang him out to dry, but the process worked, you know. And I think part of the reason he got ultimately indicted and charged and, you know, became so public was because Jefferson was so bent on having him tossed in jail or maybe hanged because he felt like it was treasonous what was going on. And Jefferson just was very frustrated with the effort that they put into it, and they couldn't get a conviction, but it worked. And Aaron Burr was not, you know, charged. I mean, he was charged. He was not convicted. and he went on to live a long, though I think unhappy life. But the fact of the matter is, these things were there with multiple layers of protection. And I don't know the circumstances of a lot of these federal DOJ things that are coming out that don't seem to go anywhere, but it could be one of the points they fail on some of these things, that they just don't want to be embarrassed to bring it to court. Oh, that's what this is based on? Are you guys kidding me? Come on, toss that thing. What was Navarro? What was her name that was the judge over the Bundy cases for the Bunkerville stuff? What was her first name? I can't think what her first name. Anyway, when it all started coming out about, Cliven Bundy and Ammon and those guys, the judge looked at the stuff and they says, "Are you kidding me? This was so egregiously violating the baseline principles that she shut it down with prejudice and said, you guys can never open it again. You're done." I mean, the Bundy family had been living with sniper nests targeting their home for months. These guys had been in their little foxhole covered up with camouflage with probably 338 Lapuas or 300 Win Mags, trained on their family every time they came out of it. There's a lot more worse things that happened. But when this judge in Nevada started having the evidence put before her, she said, "All right, guys, we're shutting this down, and you can't bring charges again against this family." So I hate to use the term, trumped up charges were brought against the Bundys, and they beat them in the court system, although they had spent 2 years in jail in solitary confinement most of the time. So there was a lot of egregious violations that did and have occurred with that particular family, but it happens, did it happen with the J6 people? A lot of those things I think got ramrodded through because there was a setting aside of any of these judicial processes. So I don't know all the reasons they're being tossed, but I suspect that they got some pretty weak cases. And there's some judge shopping going on, probably too. There's some judges that would indict a ham sandwich if they got half a chance. But there's all sorts of political stuff that's going on, the lawfare things, that in today's system, I think is an egregious violation of what the American founders intended. And it's very frustrating. But I'm waiting for indictments to come through someday. I mean, it's kind of like, woo-woo, let's see something on the Epstein files. I mean, let's see something about, we could go back in the Clinton era and some of the things that happened. And we may get some of that if the Clintons do testify at the end of the month. Oh, Fauci, crime against humanity. Bill Gates, crimes against humanity. Here's a guy that was trying to lace his wife's drinks with antibiotics to cure her of sexually transmitted diseases he had picked up using Russian prostitutes. Okay? I'm not going to tell my wife she got this disease from me. I'm just going to put a little bit of this antibiotic in her orange juice every morning until she's all better. Okay? Well, that is a problem. That's tied into Epstein, by the way. But that's the problem, is that we have a lot of people, and I'd love to see crimes against humanity filed against Fauci, for example, and Bill Gates. I mean, where's a guy that he's medicating his wife secretly for something that he's guilty of, and he was running our healthcare system? Are you kidding me? I mean, it's just, what? But for some reason, we're not getting to the bottom of some of those, and I'd like to see some of those come to fruition. But again, keeping
Minnesota to the list too.
well, they've gone about it wrong, and we could talk about Minnesota at length for some time, but there would have been a better way to do that, and they didn't, and they've kind of lost the momentum in a lot of ways. But you're absolutely right. There were some horrid things that have happened in Minnesota. And by the way, whenever you have free money, you're going to have people in there trying to grab it. We had a saying when I was a kid, if it's free, take two. And so, and everything, it's not just the welfare fraud that's happening with the simoleons it happens in Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, every time there's free money, there's people that got their hands out and they're going to take advantage of it. And if you create a federal law that says all child care facilities that qualify for this will get $2,000 a month child care. I'm making this up as I go. You'll get $2,000 a month to take care of kids. I guarantee that people are going to enroll more kids in there than there are kids, that are involved in that. So the free money thing is on its face wrong. It can't be done. It just can't be. There's no place in that for government. Let's let churches run those things. If your church has $1 bazillion in their back pocket, they should be helping out where they can. I mean, isn't that the Christian way to do things? I thought it was. But no, we're going to invest in all sorts of other things, but not. Anyway, so that's part of the problem. I'm looking for some indictments, but right now, the system is so corrupt, they're all focused the wrong way. Anyway, Nuremberg trials. Point number 1, informed consent. I mean, they hanged people over this kind of stuff, And I've had hours-long debates with physicians that think that they shouldn't be held responsible for the Bravo Sierra that they created and what they did. I mean, hours-long discussions with physicians. And they don't think that they have any culpability anywhere, most of them, all of them that I've talked to. And so there may be some out there that have a reasonable perspective, but my perspective is the only reasonable perspective in that. But anyway, so yeah, I'd like to see some of these things be indicted. But in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 14 and 15, they have the way that the military handles these things instead of a grand jury, okay? So that had been addressed in there. Let's go on to no person shall be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. They call it double jeopardy. We talked about this briefly earlier. The point of the matter in this issue is that we violate this completely. If somebody is up for trial for murder in a state and they get exonerated, the feds will turn around and charge them with a civil rights violation, that they can put them away for at least 8 or 10 years or something like that. So they're trying them for the same offense, different law, but if you read the 39th Federalist paper and St. George Tucker's book, Constitution of the United States, you'll understand that the feds have very, very, very exceptionally limited authority to create criminal law and to adjudicate it. Criminal law is very limited. The Founding Fathers clearly stated that. And yeah, they can do stuff about piracy on the high seas and counterfeiting and some of these things. But the general government has no authority to do criminal law, basically. Now, they've created tons of extra constitutional things, these civil rights violations that now are equated to, similar to what murder charges would be, are run all the time. People get double jeopardy all the time. It's a really sad scenario. We need some principles to come back again into the national government. So before we were in the United States, the king caused persons who had faced trial, but they didn't have sufficient evidence to convict them. And then the king says, well, yeah, okay, we had to let them go this time, but we've got some real good evidence now. Let's go rearrest them for the same charge. Okay? Well, that is exactly what the founders wanted to prevent. They just basically keep them on ice until they can come up with some more evidence. No, what? Take your best shot. And if it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. And if they say, nope, we're not charging them because, or we're not convicting them because whatever, you don't get another shot at it. The king used to do that all the time. Okay, so this was, double jeopardy protection. It was in the Bill of Rights to prevent that kind of abuse in America. Okay. So I'm going to read you here about these workarounds, and I'm going to quote St. George Tucker here because in the next slide after this one, because I said this guy was pretty specific. Let me just tell you a little bit of background for St. George Tucker. Enoch, before I get too long-winded, we're 2 hours into how long we wanted to be here, And I'm probably going to have to come back again if you want me to finish this particular aspect up. But how long do you want me to go this evening? Okay, you guys are settled in for the duration? You brought lunch, I hope, and maybe a little for me. Okay, we won't go too much longer because everybody has to get home, and we have, if it replicates our drive down, 2.5 hours to get back. I know it won't be bad as traffic, I'm pretty confident. And there's no snow, so that's a real good thing for us. Okay, so they have worked around this double jeopardy thing, and we'll try and figure out a good point to break here in a moment. Okay, so here's, St. George Tucker. I said I was going to introduce him to you again. Preeminent constitutional scholar, founding era. I think there's a good case that could be made that he was just such a creature. Brilliant man out of Virginia. And he was not at the Constitution Convention. And why was that? Because he was single-handedly on his own rewriting all of the criminal code for Virginia while those guys were in Philadelphia writing a constitution. This is a bright guy, a really bright guy. And he rewrote their criminal code because it needed to be updated from what the King's Code was, okay? Because we had been loyal citizens to the King in previous times. And so they needed to rewrite the laws. And he did that. That's how bright this guy was. Now, by the way, in his view of the Constitution of the United States, which was published in 1803 during the Jefferson administration, you need to get a hold of this. If you love the plain English words of the United States Constitution, you'll be cheering woo all the way through this. What he started out to do when he wrote that, or was writing it, or going to write it, it was like, I'm going to take the 4 volumes of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, and I am going to modify them. Now that we're a different country with a constitution, I'm going to modify them to conform to the United States Constitution and our, jurisprudence here. So he started off to rewrite, just with, he thought, I think, when he wrote, okay, we're going to have to change some commas and periods, not exactly that way, but we're going to change this concept here, and we're going to go through all 4 volumes of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, which had been instrumental in the founding of the United States, because Blackstone had published them 1765 to 1769 in England, and they'd been imported to the North American continent, and all the founding fathers assiduously studied them. And he thought, well, let's just polish those up a little bit and make them American. Well, he got into it, and it was like, I can't do this. Now, I've been there before. I mean, I've been places where it's like, okay, this is a pipe dream that ain't going to work. So he had to start from scratch and write a view of the Constitution of the United States. It was published in 1803, magnificent document. It very heavily referred to the Constitution itself, to the Federalist Papers, to the ratification processes that the Constitution went through, and all that kind of stuff. Great document. I really recommend it. So what happened was he wrote this view, and like I say, published in 1803. Get a hold of it and read it. But I will tell you this too. We don't speak the same language that the founder spoke. And just to give you an idea, years ago, this was 40 years ago, I had a friend that had some kind of processing, software that you could put in, sentences and sentence structure and phrases and all that kind of stuff. Even maybe reviews that came right off the page of some stuff that had been published. And the software would evaluate what level it was written at. And so he did this with a lot of the, the stuff that's coming out now, newspapers and things. And it was at a 7th grade level, okay? And then he put the Federalist Papers in, 32nd grade level. It's like, nobody's that smart, And so anyway, it was like, holy cow. So that was the method to the madness that I had when I was putting together the farewell address. So Washington's farewell address, fundamental principles that are so magnificent that if our founding fathers' wisdom could be instilled into the people today, I think we'd have a lot fewer problems. But so here's the George Washington Farewell Address. The definitions out of Webster's 1828 dictionary, the use of those words in a proper syntax and context, and then once you understand those, you can read a lot of the other documentation, including the other farewell addresses and the inaugural addresses and everything. But once you understand those, you should be able to read St. George Tucker's stuff. And I explained this to a guy one time. He said, "What can I read? What do you recommend that's really hot, you know?" Well, you know, if you've done these things and laid this framework and paid this down payment, if you will, I really recommend View of the Constitution of the United States. "Oh, how do I get that?" I told him how to get it and everything. About 2 weeks later, I get a call from him. He says, "I got Tucker's View of the Constitution." I says, "Well, great. What do you think of it?" He says, "Well," he says, "here's a sentence that's got 54 words in it. What does it mean?" And I says, "Did you do what I said you should do about the farewell address and the using of the founder's words and learning that language?" He said, "No." I says, "Go do that, and then let's talk again." So anyway, Tucker wrote in a very eloquent manner, as did all the founding fathers. But you know, the Federalist Papers, if they truly are 32nd grade level, which I don't think they are, but I must tell you that my master's degree is in public administration. And in that degree, we got assigned 4 Federalist Papers to read out of the 85. I was like, "That's all? Are you guys kidding me? You call yourselves a degree?" I mean, you know, that was kind of my attitude. And when we were going through those, it was a kind of a non-traditional group of students. Most of them were mid-career people seeking a master's degree. And they came from all walks of life, but there were comments in the class like, "This is the most difficult reading I've ever had in my life." And it's like, no, this was written for the newspapers in 1788. Really, really strange. But anyway, St. George Tucker, highly recommended. Fog through it if you can. It says here, this is a direct quotation, "The very guarded manner in which Congress are vested with authority to legislate upon the subject of crimes and misdemeanors." He's talking about the general government. It's a very guarded manner. There's very few elements that they can legislate on that create crime. Now, that doesn't stop the IRS from on their own creating crime through administrative law and charging people and having them then go through their trial process without juries and without any kind of protections that the founders put in. And then if you lose and you appeal it after you've spent all your money, then you can go to trial. But they're judge, jury, and hangman, and I'm just using them as one example. And we've used others before, that it should be plainly apparent to everybody that these administrative things, and Madison was very clear, if you have, you know, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch rolled into one body or individual or people, it's the very definition of tyranny. Okay, 47th Federalist Paper and the 51st Federalist Paper can be reviewed for that kind of thing. But so anyway, he's talking about Congress are vested with, it's a guarded manner, that they're vested with authority to legislate upon the subject of crimes and misdemeanors. They are not entrusted with the general power over these subjects, but a few offenses are selected from the great mass of crimes with which society may be infested, upon which only Congress are authorized to prescribe the punishment or define the offense. All felonies and offenses committed upon land, in all cases not expressly enumerated, so unless we listed it, they're being reserved to the states respectively. So that's the problem, is that you cannot have a Congress that is limiting themselves to their constitutional bounds that does stuff like this. "Oh, we didn't do it. We gave that authority to the BATFE, or we gave that authority to create their own law in the IRS code." Or pick a place, OSHA, you know, the TSA. I mean, pick a place. And they cannot delegate their authority, particularly since the general government does not have enumerated. It says there, doesn't it? Where does it say that? Expressly enumerated.
So, does that does that mean Congress is limited to maritime or something?
No. If they go into maritime, there's kind of there is a place for that. Piracy on the high seas, for example. Okay, but here's the problem: the maritime law now is being written to allow them to adjudicate things on land, isn't it? They say, oh, you broke this law. Well, what kind of law? Well, it's based on maritime law, and the maritime law has to do with piracy on the high seas. See, they could make laws that say, no, you can't seize oil tankers on the high seas. Just as an example. So the Congress really has some limited authority. Go read Article 1, Section 8, the whole thing. Congress shall have power to blah, blah, blah. Coin money, counterfeiting. The idea of naturalization, immigration, those kind of things. And basically it comes down to waging war, authorizing the waging of war, and what you do with what you capture in war. Okay? Well, I can just get a couple of these things out and we'll see this. It's so astounding to me. And the president has, shall we say, usurped that power today? Okay. Congress shall have power to, and verse 9. That's kind of scripture, isn't it? Okay, yeah. I thought it was. It's clause 9, Article 1, Section 8, clause 9. To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. So Article 3 of the Constitution puts the Supreme Court as an organic portion of the Constitution, and it enumerates their powers in there. But Congress creates courts below the Supreme Court, if you will. And so Congress can create and Congress can take it away. And by the way, that's one of the reasons, shall we say, that the FISA court is completely unconstitutional. Okay? The FISA court is a secret court, and we could talk at great length about what they have done and why it's unconstitutional. But basically, if you look back in Article 2, you'll discover that the president nominates and the Senate confirms, right? Any nomination to a Supreme Court justice or anything like that. That ain't the way the FISA court happens. Who nominates? It's Justice Roberts. Where the heck did that come from? So they created a court, a secret court, that is completely outside the process that was defined in the Constitution. And so it's a court that says Congress shall have power to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. Congress, no, this guy, Judge Roberts, basically holds the power of that. I mean, it's so bizarre. And you find that they're a rubber stamp court, not hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of cases have come before them, and they've only denied a few handfuls of them. It's a rubber stamp court, but it's a extra constitutional court. Anyway, that's another discussion we could have. Again, going to clause 10, Congress shall have power to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. Okay, so that's where this high seas thing comes in. Congress has power to do these things, piracies and felonies on the high seas, and others on the law of nations. Where the heck? Law of Nations isn't defined in here. Law of Nations was a book written in 1758 by a guy named Vattel. He was Swiss. He wrote it in French. It was published then in 1758, and it was translated into English in 1760. And the term Law of Nations is the international code, if you will, that the Founding Fathers have been using. And we've got statements made by Ben Franklin, for example, that the Congress, the United States Congress, at the time of the founding of the nation, used that as the basis of creating law, okay, for international cases. So another place that we don't have a definition in the Constitution is natural-born citizen. But the Law of Nations has that definition. And it's a very specific. I wish we could talk about that. But who is a natural-born citizen? It's very specific. The child inherits their citizenship from the father. And so if you are from France and you and your wife come here and you have a baby while you're here, The place of birth is the United States, but the citizenship is French. Okay, and they had all sorts of really tightly woven statements about, what kind of ship you were on, if you have a baby on the ship, or what port you're in, or what the ship's flagged under, and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so the law of nations was the origins of these kinds of things. And again, they didn't have to define them in this document, because it's like if you go in a room and there's 15 little kids, you say, who wants pizza? Well, if they're over the age of 4, they know what a pizza is and they want it, probably. Okay, so they didn't have to define it. It was well defined to them. So offenses against the law of nations, that refers back to Vattel's book. Okay, Clause 11, Congress shall have power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning the captures on land and water. Okay, so declaring war hasn't happened in my lifetime. And as you can see by the gray beard, I've been around a few days, and it's never happened in my life. Congress has never, ever exercised their constitutional responsibility in that matter. And we've had unending wars since my earliest memories. The last time war was declared was June of 1942. No, it wasn't. It was Japan, wasn't it? December 8th, no. There was a handful of countries that we went to war with in June of 1942 that were kind of hanger-oners to the, they were coming in on the Axis side, so they declared war against us. We declared war against them. But anyway, since June of 1942, why do I keep saying that? We haven't declared war. Okay, Congress shall have power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal. That's basically the subcontracting of war. We can grant letters of marque and reprisal that says, let's just take an example. Let's say we really decided that Osama bin Laden was responsible for 9/11, 2001. We could have subcontracted that to some, and I've personally known well some of the individuals we could have subcontracted this to, and they could have taken Osama bin Laden out at 300 meters with a 155 grain Spitzer boat tail, and we'd have been done if Osama bin Laden had been. But we went to war in Afghanistan unconstitutionally and all that kind of stuff, dragged it on for 20 years, and then we lost billions and billions of dollars of stuff there that was.
And what if we said the U.S. military was responsible?
Well, what if? That's a very good question, and that's probably a question that needs to be answered. By the way, I've got the 9/11 Commission report sitting on my bookshelf right next to my Warren Commission report, the John F. Kennedy thing. They're both wonderful works of fiction, but it's a tragic travesty, what we have come down to our official reporting. But so the letters of marque and reprisal, we could subcontract war to somebody else. We give them a letter that says, hereby you are authorized in the name of the United States to go wage war or take ships or whatever. And then going on in Clause 11, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. So if we capture something, let's just say an oil tanker, Congress has responsibility for that. Let's just say Gitmo, these people that supposedly were involved in this terror thing. Congress has responsibility. It is not a presidential prerogative. Okay, so Clause 11, to raise and support armies, Clause 12, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. 13, to provide and maintain a navy. 14, which we just reviewed moments ago, to make rules for the government and regulation of land and naval forces. Okay, so Congress has been delegated these authorities. The president is only, and if you read 69th Federalist paper, which you all ought to read tonight before you go to bed, if you read the 69th Federalist paper, you'll find the president has zero authority to do anything he's been doing. He is the chief admiral or general to carry out the directions of the Congress once these things have happened. So all of these things are complete, egregious violations of the Constitution. And so when you ask about this stuff about high seas, well, is it maritime law? Well, no, it's these piracies and felonies committed on the high seas, which some of the actions of our current president could be viewed in that microscope. Okay, so all of these things were clearly defined. And so St. George Tucker, as you can see on this slide up here, was clearly aware of that. And he wrote eloquently about these kinds of things. And these crimes, so-called, that are being adjudicated, brought forth, charged, whatever you want to call it, against many individuals are way beyond the purview of the general government. Okay? So I think what I'm going to do is end here. We only have 108 slides left to go in this particular presentation. And I am always criticized, maybe not always, but often, for over-preparing some of these things. But maybe it's a temptation to either not come back or to come back. Because we're not done with the Fifth Amendment yet. Because we have not yet discussed the incrimination, self-incrimination. You know, I take the Fifth. This happens a lot. And we should not say, oh, because they took the Fifth, we're going to judge them as guilty. Because that can't enter into the equation. So we'll start with that one if you want me to come back next time. And if Enoch invites me back, again, it's dangerous to say, come up in front of these people and talk, because it's not pretty. So anyway, Enoch, anything you want me to do? I mean, we're way over time.
Yeah, we can just wrap up.
Do you want to come wrap up, or do you want me to say that's a wrap? Okay. There's the microphone.
Okay. Yep. So the next event will be March 6th. So it would be happy to see everyone again. And online folks, you know, share the link, tell your friends about next month. You can pass around the link, the Boot Camp Monthly link. And I guess we're going to continue Fifth Amendment deep dive. And if anyone would like to invite Defending Utah or the Committees Association to speak anywhere in the state this year, just keep that in mind. We're available to speak on a variety of topics, to whether it's city councils or just local groups, or you know, just reach out to us on what you're thinking. And other than that, thanks for sticking around till 9 o'clock tonight, and we'll see you guys next month.
Well, by the way, remind me if you want to talk about March 6th, because that's watershed